A very, very good morning to you and a very warm welcome to Saïd Business School in the University of Oxford. My name is Atif Ansar. I'm the Program Director of the MSc in Major Program Management. If you'd like to apply, please do get in touch. I'm also very pleased to welcome so many of our alumni as well as students, both from the MSc in Major Program Management as well as the UK Government's Major Projects Leadership Academy for Senior Civil Servants. In many ways, the major aim of this conference is to activate this community of practice. Vitruvius, the very famous Roman master builder and scholar, said that master building was a child of reflection and practice. So we are particularly honored to welcome so many practitioners to Oxford, and what better place to conduct that reflection than the world's best university and one of its oldest too. I'd like to also highlight that this provides us an opportunity to conduct engaged research with practitioners that is meaningful to your work. And your success is what we most value. So please do engage with the faculty today and with each other, and let us know what areas puzzle you that we can conduct our research in those areas to help you solve real challenges. I'd like to point out a few housekeeping elements. The fire exits are in the back and over here. There will be an alarm at 11 o'clock in remembrance of the Armistice Day. It's not a fire alarm, but please be silent for 2 minutes during that period, and there'll be another alarm letting you know when that 2-minute period is over. I suggest you come back into the room just before 11 o'clock so we can observe the Armistice Day's silence together. The restrooms are just outside the room to your left, as well as if you could please all turn off your mobile phones, including the speakers. I'd now like to welcome Dean Peter Tufano to come up, give you another warm welcome, to thank our sponsors and introduce our first keynote speaker, Mr. Brendan Bechtel. Dean Tufano.
So good morning, everyone. Welcome, as Atif said, to Oxford University. Welcome to Saïd Business School. And for most of you, welcome back. Thrilled to see so many graduates from the MSc program and Major Program Management, and our alumni from the Major Program Leadership Academy here today. So welcome and welcome back. And for those of you who haven't been to the school before, welcome especially if this is your first time or your first time to the business school. We hope that you'll learn a lot about what we're doing here at the school in this space, and perhaps a little bit more as well. I also want to say thank you. First of all, thank you to all of you for coming out on this Friday to join us for this important conversation, to activate this community, as Atif was saying. I want to say a special thank you to the organizers here. Atif just spoke. He's been really the driving force behind this, along with our alumni who have really instigated and kind of goaded us on to do more. Aggie Gajuska. Close enough, perhaps. Thank you so much. Liesl Barrow. Thanks to the team that's been putting this together, Tiffany Franklin and her whole team. Thank you to all of them. A special thank you to the sponsors who have helped make this day possible: Bechtel, Oracle, PwC, Hill International, and Arcadis. And we could not do this without your support. So to reflect a little bit on what we're doing here today and how it fits into the business school and the broader university, I thought I'd say a few words as a way of introducing our speaker this morning. So if you think about economic and social progress in the world, it can happen in small, medium, and large sizes. And in business schools in particular, we sometimes focus on the small and medium as opposed to the large. On the small, you have like Russian stacking dolls. On the inside, small, high-growth ventures, entrepreneurship. And we, of course, do much about that. Tomorrow, we'll be hosting a conference here for students interested in entrepreneurship. We'll probably have 500 or 600 students joining us. Entrepreneurship is super important. There's no question that innovation in the world will come from entrepreneurship. And it is one of the 3 legs of the stool, as it were, upon which economic and social progress is built. Kind of the second leg, which is quite big, is the middle doll in the stacking set, which is big business. This is the traditional province of business schools. When I got an MBA many years ago, we spent most of our time thinking about large businesses, large multinationals and the work that they would do, national businesses and others. And these days, if you look at most business schools, their curricula, their center of gravity is really centered between these 2 sets of activities. between large traditional businesses and between entrepreneurship of various types. But there is, however, as you all know, a third leg on this stool, which is things that are bigger than small ventures, that are bigger than traditional enterprises. They are very large, mammoth. They are mega projects. They are infrastructure projects. They are the super large things, often that are done in concert with government, public-private partnerships. And they produce roads and bridges. They produce power plants. They produce energy systems. They produce weapon systems. They produce things that are far too big for a small startup to ever think about, for one single firm to accomplish, and often require the cooperation and collaboration across multiple sectors. And in business schools, we tend to not spend much time on that third leg of the stool. I think that's a massive mistake. And one of the reasons why I was drawn to come here to Oxford is because of the expertise that this school had developed, was developing, and continues to develop in this space to complement the work that we do around large projects, around large firms and entrepreneurship. That work is manifested in the great research. You're going to hear about that today from our colleagues, from a great MSc program that we run, by the work that we're doing in terms of engaging with governments and others in this agenda, this practice-based agenda. Because to the extent that we can improve the functioning of these types of projects through our research and teaching, we'll make a major contribution to the world. And I think you'll hear more about that over the course of the day. But if you're in this space, it would be impossible not to have run into Bechtel. If not run into, been on, been around, been inside one of their projects. As one of the world's largest construction and engineering firms. How many of you have gone to Paris on the Eurostar? Anybody? All right. I think that's a Bechtel project, right, Joan? How many of you, I won't ask you to raise your hands, if you've ever looked at the Hoover Dam? Yeah, I think another Bechtel project. I come from Boston. There's something called the Big Dig. Complicated, hard project, but it's fundamentally transformed the city of Boston. Again, a Bechtel project. I last week was in San Francisco. I rode the BART. As far as I can tell, that's another one of your projects. In the UK here, we're thinking about there's Crossrail, which is a project that will, I think, fundamentally transform transportation networks in the UK. It will transform what happens here in Oxford because, as I understand it, the connections through Oxford are going to make us as close to London as London Business School might be, which is a great, and more. And much, much more. So, I could go on for some time about the projects that you may not have seen a Bechtel label on, but that they were, for 118 years, been quietly taken care of, pushing forward, engineering, designing, developing. So the Bechtel Corporation is pretty important. 118 years is a long time. No, not by Oxford standards. Because we think in terms of centuries, so they've got one under their belt. However, if you think about corporations, a century is a long time. There's a Century Club of companies that have existed for more than a century, and it's not that big a club. Of the 5,000 public companies, and Bechtel is not a public company in the US, far fewer than 10% are members of the Century Club. And you'd recognize some, but not all of their names. And when you live 100 years, and when you live with your name on the door, and I think Brendan will probably talk about this, the title of today's conference becomes especially important. So let's just look at it for a moment. I think it says Legacy of Major Programs Making Good on Our Promises. And the two words I would focus on is legacy and promises. The projects that I just listed, and many, many more that Brendan can talk about, have long, probably sales cycles and even longer construction cycles. And more than that, they have longer lives. And their impact on the world is not measured in weeks or months or years. Sometimes it's in decades and longer. And so therefore, the legacy of what it is that this work produces will only unfold through generations. And it's perhaps not surprising that Bechtel is a private company, a family-owned firm. We do a lot of work on family-owned firms here at the school. And in our research, what we found is, and it's ongoing research, is that while there's a pressure for short-termism and focus on quarterly earnings, family firms seem to think differently. They seem to be able to think on a more long-term basis And when your name's on the door, what we found in other companies is that your values are represented on the front door as well. The 4 values that I've read about Bechtel are safety and quality, that kind of makes sense, and ethics and sustainability. Now for many firms, words like that won't mean a lot. But I think what we're going to hear is that they actually mean a great deal inside this firm. And I was pleased to note that yesterday, I think it was yesterday, maybe it was the day before, Transparency International, which is really not a kind of an organ. So if you don't know what Transparency is, it's it's an international organization that tracks transparency and corruption activities around the world. And they gave their corporate award to Bechtel, I think on the 10th, known for other things as well on that day, for their ethical business practices, their transparent standards, and corporate citizenship. Leading this firm in the 5th generation is Brendan Bechtel. Brendan has come up through the firm. He was most recently president and COO. He's worked in the oil, gas, and LNG parts of the business. And when we only met for the first time last night. I was impressed by his intelligence, his warmth. Sorry, I can tell. In the course of my business, I meet lots of CEOs. And I was truly impressed last night by kind of the approach that he'd taken and how he was talking about the firm and what he'd like to do with it. And perhaps the most amazing thing that I think I've never heard a CEO say, which is, well, I've got to think about the next 30 years. The average tenure of CEOs these days, I know the number bobs around, 6 or 7 years. The average tenure of deans of business schools, probably 3.8 years is the most recent number. I think I'm beating the odds for the moment. But not many of us think about a tenure of 30 years, and therefore think about strategies and think about the implications and legacy over a period of that long. So I'm thrilled today to welcome Brendan Bechtel to Oxford, to Saïd Business School, and to hopefully for the first of many visits, or the second of many visits to this great campus, and to join this community that Atif said was activated this morning. Activate away. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dean, for the very kind introduction. The 3.8 years of tenure, just like on 5th generation, all I can say is it's both a wonderful and a scary thing to be a statistical outlier to the good. And as I'm sure Bent would agree, everything always reverts to the mean. So we'll just we'll stay focused on that. So no, thank you for the very kind introduction. It's truly a great honor for me to be sharing the stage with the Dean and with Dr. Ansar and with Professor Flubia here at Oxford, where you've really designed and built a world-class experience to educate today's and tomorrow's leaders, particularly in the realm of program management, which of course is something very near and dear to mine, Bechtel's heart. I applaud Saïd Business School for setting and undertaking such an ambitious agenda for the school, again, with an aim for the long term, something else that is really near and dear to our heart at Bechtel. As the Dean pointed out, that makes perfect sense given that Oxford University is the oldest university in the English-speaking world. Bechtel has not been around as long as Oxford, but we do have a sense of perspective given our founding over 118 years ago, which makes us one of the older and larger construction and engineering firms in the world. Let me also say that we're delighted to partner with the business school for this event, and I also want to say thank you to the organizers and to my fellow speakers. When I saw the title of my remarks, Building a Lasting Legacy, 5 Generations of Family Leadership, I thought, this is a little grand. You will be relieved to hear that this is not a commercial for Bechtel. I intend to address the challenges of legacy and the responsibility of legacy and what 5 generations of experience have taught us about that. Before I get into what legacy means for me and Bechtel, I thought about all of you here, particularly the students in the MPLA program, about the legacies that you're trying to create. Some of you are trying to create a lasting legacy, starting from scratch, Some of you, like me, face the challenge and opportunity of continuing and leading and modernizing the legacy of an existing company or institution. I did a little bit of research on the makeup of the major projects class, and I don't think any of you will have any trouble building your legacy. It's a hugely impressive peer group that you're a part of. Many of you have already started your own business. 36% are women. The class represents an astonishing 58 different nationalities. That's extraordinary. If you've already started your own business, then you already know very viscerally one aspect of building a lasting legacy: taking risks and maybe failing. Taking a risk, but then having things not go as planned, is not necessarily a negative. Throughout Bechtel's 118-year history, we've taken big risks, some of which at the time we thought we understood, some of which it turns out we didn't understand well enough. Most have paid off. We take great pride in building first-of-a-kind projects that have never been attempted before on a large scale. But I think lasting legacies for mega projects are not defined solely by our successes. Lasting legacies, especially relating to a global company, are also solidified by your mistakes, how you learn and how you adapt from them, and then how you marshal forward and onwards for other challenging opportunities. But no matter who you are, you're trying. You're trying. And that's the key, in my view, to building a lasting legacy. Take our work in the construction industry. There is no doubt that major programs in our business can leave a physical legacy that inspires, or as Professor Flubia might say, enraptures. The Hoover Dam, our first nuclear reactor back in 1949, Jubail Industrial City in Saudi Arabia, and here in the UK with our work on the Channel Tunnel, the first high-speed train line in the UK, Crossrail. Legacy for us is something much more than what we have produced or built. The real legacy, the one that lasts across 5 generations, that perhaps maybe someday my 2 daughters may continue, is less about the what we create and much more about how we delivered it. Did we deliver what we promised? As safely as possible? Did we do it sustainably for coming generations? Did we leave with ours and the client's reputations not sustained but enhanced? Did we deliver something of real benefit to people? And most importantly for us, within our own company, did the Bechtel team always remain true to our vision, values, and covenants? The word legacy tends to make people think backwards, and not always in a positive way. True, there's a rich and deep history of remarkable engineering feats for major projects around the world. But as an industry, we need to recognize that engineering marvels, which contain awe-inspiring feats of construction, do not serve as the only attributes to judge projects as successful. After all, projects are not successful if the taxpayer paid over the odds, if anticipated benefits are not fully realized, if safety was an issue, or companies went bankrupt in the process. The construction industry's record on delivering on its promises is one that can be improved. But undoubtedly true, each and every company, ours included, has had its share of successes as well as projects that haven't gone as well as we would have hoped. I believe that as an industry, we need to do something different, something better, if we are to maximize benefits from projects and create greater predictability of outcomes. As we at Bechtel say, deliver as promised is fundamental to the continued success of Bechtel and the construction industry as a whole. Excuse me. While I will reflect a little bit on the legacy of projects past and what we have learned from them, I also think about this notion of delivering as promised in 2 parts. The first is the promise itself, in essence, the baseline agreement, setting expectations between the owner and contractor. And second, delivering effectively against that baseline. And of course, in our business as elsewhere, this is the age-old debate between business development or sales managers and project managers. Was it the estimate and the deal that was wrong in the first place, or was it a failure of delivery? When it comes to the reputation of our industry, to the public trust and confidence in what we do, and to long-term success of our industry, to me it seems imperative to understand the root causes of problems and how we can do better. Making promises can, however, be just as important as delivering on them. One aspect that hasn't changed from the handshake deals that my great-great-grandfather used in 1898 to today, signing a modern agreement of hundreds of pages of legal documents, in some cases thousands, is that at the end of the day, both come down to making good on your word. I might not use the professor's phrase delusion and deception, but I would agree with the core thrust that planning and estimating for major investment projects, especially those being publicly funded, has been as influenced by hope and optimism as by expectation and evidence. We as a company, and yes, I as an individual, have fallen victim to the temptation of the thrill of the chase, to the must-win prospect. But we are constantly learning from our mistakes as a company, as an industry, institutionalizing those painful lessons learned and becoming better at more objective risk assessments. The last UK review into defense acquisition similarly identified optimism bias in cost estimating and overprogramming of the budget as a major opportunity for improvement. I think this is an area in which the public sector can benefit from some private sector processes, culture, and experience. Bechtel's team is working here with industry partners and the civil service to support the Ministry of Defense in procuring and managing equipment. But if I trend back, if I think back towards the physical built environment, which is predominantly what Bechtel is focused on, I'm extremely conscious that every time we put forward a fixed price bid for a mega project, such as the roughly $25 billion worth of lump sum, guaranteed price and schedule, liquefied natural gas work that we had on Curtis Island in Australia, which we've just completed, we're putting our financial health on the line as a company. In the States, we have the expression, we're betting the farm. In our case, as a privately held company, we are not playing with other third-party shareholders' capital. We are literally betting our farm. This sharpens the mind and tightens the belly. It also leads to a more conservative view of downside risk, particularly in comparison to some of our publicly traded peers who may be more concerned about hitting their quarterly earnings targets and analyst reactions. Being privately held, we can be patient and focus on the long term. We can operate consistently with our core values and strategies. And the consequential rigor of our approach to estimating, review, and approvals, the use of real historical costs, reference class forecasting, bottoms-up estimating, risk and contingency analysis are all key to our business. Indeed, I believe, and I think my colleagues that are here with me would agree, that our quite painful risk-based approvals process for tenders is one of the most important reasons why we've prospered. It is not taking risky bets that define our legacy. Continuing to build our legacy for another 118 years requires us to objectively assess risks, using the outside view, as the professor calls it, to place calculated bets that contemplate a realistic view of downside risks. There's a great saying from Andy Grove of Intel, "Only the paranoid survive." I would amend it to say, "Only the realistic will thrive." Our paranoia at Bechtel about downside risk learned the hard way, the painful way, over more than a century of mega projects, not all of which went as planned, is what drives our obsession with understanding and managing downside risks, and what drives our insistence on realistic approaches to partnering and contracting with our customers and partners. On a related note, as most of you know from learning about the break-fix model of project management, one critical issue for customers is to avoid, or at the very least, mitigate the fallout from excessively low bids. The outcomes which can either serve a big loss for the contractor or a painful process of change control, renegotiation, and litigation, and or rebaselining. There are some positive examples where government customers have set up tendering so that quality, predictability of outcome, experience, and track record are weighted properly against cost. But sadly, there have been many other occasions where the lure of the inachievable lowest price has been impossible to resist. Today, we face intense and growing competition in many markets from companies that are willing to take on irrationally risky deals. We don't shy away from competition, but to avoid a race to the bottom when it comes to price, safety, and quality, we need better thinking on both sides of the negotiating table. Industry needs to set out a compelling value proposition, and customers need to really think through what outcomes they want and how they can best achieve them. For Bechtel, we look at all of these issues in the long term. As I mentioned before, I believe that's easier for Bechtel because we are privately held, and therefore less prone to needing to provide blockbuster results quarter after quarter. That's true. That's why we made a strategic choice decades ago to stay with a privately held ownership and governance model, and why we will, as far as I'm concerned, always stay privately held. It is a strategic advantage in our industry, and in our view, it fosters a more balanced and sustainable governance model. But trust me, we have our pressure to always succeed as well, but always by taking the long view towards our customers, our colleagues, and our work. That's the right approach that has formed the basis of our legacy, and I, for one, see no reason to change that. Collectively, we can all do a better job of getting initial costs and schedule estimates more consistently accurate and realistic, and in setting up competitive tendering so all stand a better chance of delivering on what we have promised. I'm going to end my talk today by setting out some areas that I think our industry needs to focus on if we are to get better on delivering what we promise to our customers and stakeholders. One of my favorite sayings that some of my colleagues have heard me say probably too many times is that trust is hard to earn and easy to lose. You build a legacy by being trustworthy and delivering as promised over and over and over again. So these delivery issues are legacy issues, not only for Bechtel, but for our competitors in the industry as well. It's probably appropriate to pause and reflect and remind ourselves here on some of the unique challenges of delivering major projects, particularly in the public sector. Requirements management and change control is often a tougher problem in the public sector, especially where the owner of the requirement may not directly feel the costs of making changes or over-specifying. Public and political desire for early announcements and certainty about schedule and cost may in some cases set unreasonable benchmarks against which project delivery is later measured. Managing funding and cash flow for major projects is hard enough without the added burden also of annual budget cycles. And finally, time, which for the private sector is often the most precious resource of all and tends to be the most elastic variable in the public sector. And it doesn't always provide the same forcing function for delivery, except where dates are externally fixed. For example, the Olympics or the delivery of the Jubilee Line extension for the Millennium celebrations. So let's get back to my four themes tied to project legacy issues. My first theme is focused on efficiency and productivity, and it's linked to innovation. I was really struck by some analysis undertaken by McKinsey in 2015 that demonstrated whilst productivity in manufacturing had doubled over the previous decade, productivity in construction has remained flat or declined over the same period. Manufacturing productivity has doubled over the last 10 years, and construction has stayed flat. It's a pretty sobering conclusion. I was equally struck by some of the ideas in that paper on how construction productivity might be improved. I grew up in Silicon Valley before it was cool. And so given my background in Silicon Valley, I do agree that investment in new technology such as 3D printing, drones, robotics, autonomous machines, artificial intelligence, laser and radar technology can and will help deliver faster and better construction and design. My Bechtel colleagues and I know, even as a 118-year-old incumbent, we must innovate or die. This is one reason why, like Oxford, Bechtel has invested $60 million in an innovation center and intrapreneurship. We look at all ideas, even the far-fetched wild ones, and decide on which ones we will place some bets, especially tied to improving delivery and meeting our promises on our mega projects. Some examples. We're developing the world's leading small modular nuclear reactor because of the power, the return, the carbon-free future it offers in years to come. As my finance people remind me constantly, it won't make a return on its investment tomorrow, but we're thinking long-term. We innovate to improve how we deliver our projects because we are never satisfied, and because we believe we must be continuously improving to stay competitive and, more importantly, to increase our positive impact on the world. That's building a legacy. But equally as important to me is strengthening basic project management, particularly from very early stage project planning, which matters intensely, as you all know, right through to startup, commissioning, and operations. This is how I often think about innovation, not just about new technology, which, by the way, at worst can be a solution in search of a problem. Always beware of the solution in search of a problem. But constantly seeking to strengthen and improve existing ways of doing business. For example, this could be through new commercial mechanisms, finding new ways to connect and engage with our teams, or finding a new and simpler way to solve an old, frustrating problem. My second theme is on risk. A recent report by Deloitte and the UK Infrastructure and Projects Authority on major capital programs, which really charted the shift in thinking from a 1980s mentality to try and transfer as much risk as possible to the supply chain as quickly as possible, through to the mentality of projects such as Terminal 5 at Heathrow, where the mantra was the customer owns all the risk all the time. From where I sit, this all-or-nothing approach to risk management rather misses the point. As a company, we are always highly risk-aware. Yet, on other occasions, we take on multi-billion-pound fixed-price contracts which carry the potential for huge financial risk. For us, this ultimately comes down to two fundamental questions. Can we quantify and bound the risk? And second, is accountability for managing the risk and the authority to do so properly aligned? You could substitute the word influence for authority if you'd like. This is the core of Bechtel's governance model. And when we talk about governance, we mean the quality of our decision making. That's how we define governance. But the core of our governance model is that accountability and authority must always travel together. Rarely does seeking to transfer high and unbounded risk to suppliers work out well. And on an equally important note, transforming performance risk to suppliers without transferring sufficient responsibility and control is even more likely to not be successful. But used effectively, suppliers such as our company tend to perform best when we are taking on real performance risk. We believe that government will not get the most out of its contracts if they shy away from entering into the accountability authority debate when it comes to risk. My third point is on sustainability, which is really important to me personally and which represents a major element of our legacy. I think about sustainability as a core value of our industry, similar to where safety was just a few decades ago. As you all know, the construction industry in particular has been on a long journey on safety. From thinking that accidents and injuries were just an inevitable part of the job, to safety then being viewed as a differentiator for just some of the more enlightened companies that saw looking after their people as a core duty, value, and responsibility, to finally becoming an established fundamental culture of the entire industry. I think we've started on a similar journey on sustainability in the construction industry. Previously seen as just the domain of scientists and engineers and academics, sustainability is already now a compelling opportunity for competitive differentiation. For Bechtel, what does this mean? Give me a real example, Brendan. Okay. It means recycling 44,000 metric tons of construction waste, as we did with our just completed Curtis Island LNG projects. It means investing in new low-carbon energy sources, solar thermal, LNG, nuclear, and even cleaner coal technology. Investing and supporting in communities through local subcontracting, and doing our part as a company to advance the global community's 2030 sustainability development goals. Increasingly, we see sustainability efforts less as add-ons, but as a major driver of how we actually operate and conduct our business. In terms of our legacy, I expect and hope that sustainability will become a standard, rigorous element of technical qualifications and tender evaluation in the not distant future. My fourth and final point is addressing the challenge of skills retention and retooling for the engineering and construction industry in the age of knowledge work. The United States has barely sufficient activity to sustain critical skills in the traditional hands-on construction industry. A case in point is that it was a major effort for us to regenerate the skills needed, particularly on the nuclear side, to build and commission Watts Bar 2, the first new nuclear generating capacity in the US since 1996. We're working with Hitachi and Horizon on Anglesey to do that again here in the UK, to deliver the Wilva new nuclear power station. It is difficult for our nations to develop and retain the capacity locally to deliver these once-in-a-generation megaprojects. So again, there's a need for international cooperation, for mobility of highly skilled and scarce labor, coupled with effective means to bring new talent and local workforces into the industry. That includes courses such as the Major Projects course here at the Business School, of course. These all represent the key to the future success and vitality of the construction industry. I hope that I have appropriately set the scene for debate and discussion today. I believe it is an exciting time to be in our industry and really greatly look forward to all of your views when we get to the Q&A. And one last point on legacy. Our track record of success over 118 years does not guarantee that we will be around 118 years from now. A legacy is defined by how we will constantly adapt as the business and indeed the world around us changes. If you remember one thing from my talk this morning, please remember, especially when it comes to managing risk, that only the realistic will thrive. Thank you.